All right, well, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name's Colin Dunn. I'm excited to speak with you today and to introduce a great panel speaking about wind projects and amazing infrastructure investments. We have a great panel here today, including Steve Frenkel, Adrienne Downey, Oytan, and Shashank. And they're going to be speaking with you about their projects. We have time for some questions. Feel free to send those questions. But we'll get right to it. And these are all really exciting projects to me. I have a background that started in sustainability and engineering, and more recently got into the cybersecurity world. And so with projects with the Department of Energy and protecting renewable energy from cyber attacks. So that's what we do at FEND. And so I'm really excited to hear about the impact of these projects, both on delivering clean energy, but also resilience to the grid and just delighted to be working with this panel here today. We're going to start off in the order I mentioned here, starting off with Steve. Steve Frenkel is the Vice President of Direct Connect Development Company, where he leads external affairs and supports project development and commercial efforts. Steve has more than 20 years experience of energy and clean tech policy, finance, and business development experience across roles including management consulting, business development for Renew Financial, and serving as Chief Policy Advisor at the Illinois EPA and Deputy Chief of Staff for Energy Environment in the Illinois Governor's Office. With that, Steve, we'll give it to you and go ahead.
Thanks so much, Colin. It's great to be here. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully it's coming up for everybody now. So, as Colin said, I'm Steve Frankel with Direct Connect. We are the developer of the Green HVDC link, which we believe is a new transmission model for railroads to deliver a clean energy future. And I'm going to share an idea that is probably common to all of the panelists, that we all know that transmission is needed to bring renewable energy to market. And if we want more renewables, we need more transmission. And I think we all know that the best resources are located far from population centers, and so getting those resources to market is no small feat. That's why all these important transmission projects have been developed and are underway. And so at Direct Connect, what we concluded was the traditional greenfield overhead project development approach really has faced so many challenges over the years with difficulties of siting and permitting and securing the route that we wanted to go in a different direction by co-locating high voltage direct current transmission lines underground along existing railroad corridors. And so that's what the Green project's all about. I'll get into the details of the project in just a moment. But today is obviously a tremendously exciting day for U.S. infrastructure and the energy sector with the announcement of President Biden's Build Back Better framework agreement. It sounds like I just got a call from one of my lobbyists who said there may be a vote yet tonight, so that would be very exciting. Part of what got us excited about President Biden's vision earlier during the campaign and when he first took office was his commitment to building a resilient electric transmission system. And I highlighted some of the text in green here that, from our perspective at Direct Connect and Sue Green, certainly suggests that a project like Sue Green is very much in the national interest. So the idea of mobilizing private capital to take advantage of existing transportation corridors to site high voltage transmission and use those existing right-of-ways to deliver affordable renewable energy and create good paying jobs along the way. To us, this sounded like there's only one project in the US that really checks all these boxes today, and that's the Sue Green project. So we were thrilled to see President Biden's vision and how closely it aligns with our vision for creating a national clean energy grid. And so what is Sue Green? So the Sue Green HVDC link is the first project of its kind in the US to co-locate HVDC cables underground along existing railroad corridors. We're a 350-mile, 2,100 megawatt project that would connect north central Iowa to just west of the Chicago area and connect the energy markets of MISO to PJM that would really unlock a lot of tremendous Midwest renewable energy potential, wind and solar, and deliver that clean energy into the PJM market to the east. We are a privately financed project, so we are not rate-based. There's no cost to ratepayers or to the state of Iowa or the state of Illinois. And we think that certainly with the Build Back Better framework and the introduction of an investment tax credit for transmission for the very first time certainly could help projects like Sue Green become a reality faster, and other projects that you're probably going to hear about today. There are three pillars of innovation really around Sue Green that I want to talk about briefly. So the first is development innovation and delivering renewable energy by rail. And as I mentioned, traditional overhead development that relies on eminent domain to secure the project has faced so many challenges in the Midwest and elsewhere, and billions of dollars, or certainly hundreds of millions of dollars, have been spent and lost trying to advance projects that ended up not coming to pass. Sue Green avoids that by partnering with the rail and going underground. And so we're completely within the railroad corridor and do not need to use eminent domain authority to site the project on private land. By going underground, we avoid the environmental impacts and the visual impacts of overhead transmission, which virtually eliminates landowner opposition. So when you combine avoiding eminent domain with no visual and no environmental impacts, that really expedites the project development cycle, eliminates landowner opposition, it expedites permitting, and really makes the whole process easier. If there is an easy button in transmission, it's co-location, and Sue Green is really the poster child for that. Now, of course, there is no easy button in transmission. It still is a very challenging path for any developer, but we think we've solved some of the biggest problems that have plagued transmission development in the past. And so that's the development innovation approach. There's also a market innovation strategy or a rationale for Sue Green, which I mentioned a moment ago in terms of connecting markets and sourcing from a broad portfolio of MISO renewable energy resources and collecting those resources at our converter station in central Iowa, and delivering across the HVDC line, Sue Green Link, into the Chicago area is a market-based solution that will benefit customers by bringing low-cost energy capacity, renewable energy credits and capacity resources into PJM. And the third pillar of innovation is technology innovation. And so Sue Green benefits from advances in modern HVDC technology, both in terms of cable and converter stations. And so it's only in the last few years that HVDC cable technology has advanced to make available at the 525 kilovolt class. And so that's what we're using with Sue Green. We'll be burying these cables 5 feet underground in a 3-foot trench, completely safe for railroad operations, connecting two Siemens Energy 2100 megawatt voltage source conversion converter stations, one in Iowa and one just west of Chicago. And these VSCs are truly state of the art and really will bring the grid into the digital age by providing reactive power, backstart capabilities, frequencies, and reactive power control, and full dispatchability, and really be the fastest resource on the PJM system, being able to ramp up and down to 2,000 megawatts of output within 1/100th of a second. So those three pillars of innovation that make Sue Green and underground rail co-location special, and we can do it at cost parity with traditional overhead development. And so what we show here is a comparison of Sue Green on a dollars per megawatt mile basis with traditional overhead HVDC and HVDC projects. And so why do we use dollars per megawatt mile? So typically folks think about whether a project is cost competitive based on dollars per mile spent. But we really think that the proper metric is dollars per megawatt mile because it takes into account the capacity of energy being transmitted along the transmission line. And with a project like Sue Green at the 525 kV class, we can transmit over 2,000 megawatts of renewable energy across the 250-mile-long project with very low line losses. And that allows us to develop a project on par or cheaper with traditional overhead projects, as you can see. And that's not just true for Sue Green. It's true for any underground HVDC project across a wide range of megawatt ratings and distances between 200 miles in length and above. So I think that's been a revelation to folks in the industry that going underground is no longer cost prohibitive. I'll just end by saying that, as you can see, the Class 1 rail network, nationwide network, and it connects all regions of our country to population centers. And so that's why we think that Sue Green's underground rail co-location model is truly a replicable model and a showcase for a national clean energy grid by leveraging the U.S. rail system. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, Steve, thanks so much. We've got time for a question or two in between speakers, and we've got one here. And just adding to this, setting up, it's amazing that you're able to provide that additional resilience with that cost competitiveness. But yeah, and it should be a slam dunk for the railroads. What has been the response from the railroads?
Well, we've had a lot of interest in our business development model and this underground rail co-location approach. The railroads have that right of way and have used it in the past to locate fiber optic, but the notion of being able to locate HVDC cable underground completely safe for railroad operations just represents a new revenue stream, passive revenue stream for them. And so that's garnered a lot of interest. I just wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying about climate resilience and reliability. As we've seen with the polar vortex in Texas and all the extreme weather we've seen, the wildfires in California, going underground is truly a climate resilient transmission. We're safe from extreme weather, we're safe from extreme cold, and it really provides a robust lifeline that can link regions and allow regions in different parts of the grid to share resources. And the line is bidirectional, so that provides a lifeline to both sides, to both connected regions on either side of the project.
Well, great. Well, hopefully we'll have time for additional questions afterwards, Steve. Well, I want to thank you, and we should head on to our next speaker here. Adrienne Downey is up next. She's the Principal Engineer for Offshore Wind at NYSERDA, where she's involved in all aspects of NYSERDA's offshore wind program and focused on procurements and stakeholder engagement. She brings over 10 years experience in wind, supply chain management, and consulting across climate adaptation and resilience in projects around the world. Adrienne, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and great to be here this afternoon. Just pulling up my screen. Let me know if you can see it coming across now.
You see it?
Yep. Great. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Adrienne Downey. I'm the Principal Engineer for Offshore Wind with NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I'm really delighted to have an opportunity here to speak to you about our marquee project, Empire Wind, in addition to our broader program and portfolio here for offshore wind in the state of New York. And so for those who are not familiar with NYSERDA's work, we have been leading the nation in the topic of offshore wind now since around 2015, where we have launched a comprehensive program that really touches upon all aspects of advancing really this key and pivotal and really indeed transformational resource on behalf of New Yorkers, as well as offering a model for the nation in so doing. So NYSERDA's work really spans the whole diversity of activities. We are the nation's, or excuse me, the state's think tank with regards to clean energy policy for the state of New York, but we're also somewhat crudely the do tank in that we are on the front lines of advancing these resources through particularly our procurement activities that ultimately enable our suite of projects and development for the state. So it's with that in mind that we are focused on a diversity of needs. We work on ports, supply chain, and economic development in order to maximize the opportunities associated with this new and exciting industry, but we also work very heavily on topics relating to ocean stewardship, research and analysis, as well as means by which to advance technology and lower costs. And fundamentally, through it, all of our programs at NYSERDA, we do so with a strong lens of stakeholder engagement and working to responsibly develop our resources in collaboration and partnership with communities, and with a focus on achieving our state's climate action goals, but also our state's climate justice goals and the opportunity to create an inclusive clean energy future for all New Yorkers. And so with that, when we look to our progress to date, we're really delighted to be able to share that we have now more than 4,300 megawatts in active development, is leading the way by a substantial margin in terms of the nation's activities for offshore wind, and particularly projects that are moving in earnest. So with our 5 projects, we are already working steadfastly to deliver more than 6,800 direct jobs through these projects and a combined economic activity of more than $12 billion, which includes expenditures spanning labor supplies, development, and manufacturing. And indeed, these projects, buoyed by really a pivotal alignment of state leadership over the past number of years and federal alignment, we are really delighted to see these projects moving steadfastly forward and making strong progress through their both federal permitting jurisdictions offshore, but also onshore through the state's permitting processes. So it's really a very exciting time where we're starting to see these projects advance. And these projects are equal parts offshore wind generation assets as they are electrical assets, as they are economic development opportunities via port infrastructure and supply chain growth. I think we recognize here in the state of New York that really it's a blank canvas that we have for the development of a homegrown domestic supply chain to service our needs and service this industry. And that really is a compelling value proposition for all of us. And so we have been working heavily to ensure we are able to deliver on port infrastructure investments. We have already been able to deliver more than $644 million of combined public and private funding towards port infrastructure investments. And we've been delighted to see major assets being delivered right here in New York, including tower and transition piece manufacturing, the Port of Albany, the nation's first, regional operations and maintenance hubs throughout Long Island and in New York City, as well as state-of-the-art staging and assembly operations happening at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal in New York City. So it's really this diversity of port assets as well as major investments in supply chain opportunities that are fueling our enthusiasm. And a marquee of our efforts and the recipient of today's sustainability award is the Empire Wind Project, which of course is developed through a joint venture of Equinor and BP. And we wish to commend the Equinor and BP team for their efforts for this project and for their partnership with NYSERDA as the offtake party to deliver this project, which is collectively almost 2,500 megawatts of capacity that will together bring approximately 3,500 jobs or more than 4.2 million tons of avoided greenhouse gases and almost $1 billion of health benefits. So really, this is again a marquee project for the state of New York, not just in terms of its size, but as you can see from the metrics, from the enormity of the value proposition that we seek to achieve here in the state of New York through offshore wind. It's a major energy source, a clean, renewable energy resource for our state, but it's also a huge job creator, a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions reductions and health benefits. And so it's really this incredible trifecta of opportunity and of value. And the Empire Wind Project is emblematic of all of these aspects. And so again, it is with great pleasure that we accept this award and share it together with our project development partners, Equinor and BP. And again, our sincere thanks to the CGLA team for the nomination and ultimately for the award. With this context and this backdrop that we look very closely to the future, and for those who have been following, it is an extremely dynamic time for offshore wind in the United States, and New York is poised to be to continue upon our posture as the most ambitious wind goal in the nation. We're also looking far beyond, and so we are eager to see in the next couple of weeks, the federal government, through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, initiating what will be a very exciting lease auction right here in the Bight, signaling that New York State is the place to be for offshore wind. Also, the work of the Climate Action Council is showing us that our goals and our challenges of delivering a zero emissions grid by 2040 and of deep decarbonization of our state, 85% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2050, is going to require us to be thinking ever bigger, ever bolder about our goals. And offshore wind will be central in that estimation. So we're already looking well beyond 9,000 gigawatts as we look to the future. But with that, I'll conclude my remarks and thank you very much, Colin, for the opportunity to present here today. And again, our sincere thanks to the CGLA team for the acknowledgements and recognition with the award today.
And congrats again on that award. The awards like that are given to projects that have the potential to be great examples for other projects in the future. What are some of those lessons that you would share with other folks in the planning stages, the execution, or in what ways could this be a template for planning to help those projects go more smoothly in the future?
Sure. I mean, in addition to the obvious size, which is impressive, part of what has been so compelling about the Equinor and BP proposals that we have received and ultimately comprise our offtake agreements together, is the focus on marrying a clean energy solution and the port infrastructure solutions with a lens on equity. And so the port assets that are being brought to bear are being contemplated and delivered, in partnership with local communities, and emblematic in particular of elevating opportunities for environmental justice communities to be active participants in the execution of these projects. And so it's an impressive portfolio on its face, but especially as well the means by which the projects were originally conceived and are predicated to be delivered to the state of New York is likewise extremely impressive and really demonstrates, consistent with what we've been seeing out of Washington today, really an opportunity to build back better. And that's really what is so marquee about what we've been seeing with the Equinor BP work.
Well, excellent. Well, thanks again and congratulations.
Thank you.
Up next, we've got Oytan. He's the Deputy CEO at Vineyard Wind and Vice President of Offshore Wind Project Management at Avangrid Renewables. He's deployed gigawatts of onshore and offshore wind working in North America, Europe, and Asia over the past 25 years. It's your time.
Thank you, Colin. Let me share my presentation. All right. So, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here, and I'd like to give some information about our offshore wind project called Vineyard Wind 1, which is the nation's first commercial scale offshore wind project being built. Vineyard Wind is a joint venture owned by Avangrid Renewables and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners with 50-50 shares. Avangrid Renewables is the third largest renewable energy company in the US with 8 gigawatts of operational wind and solar capacity. And the parent company of Avangrid Renewables is Iberdrola, which is one of the largest renewable asset bases in the world. And Iberdrola has a lot of experience in offshore wind development, financing, construction, operation of these kind of assets. And our joint venture partner, Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, is one of the largest offshore wind developer in the world. And they're basically a fund management company founded in 2012. And basically, they have more than $8 billion of assets under management. So moving on to an overview of an offshore wind project. Basically, wind turbine generators generate the power, and they sit on top of foundations, which we call them monopiles in the industry, and they are connected via array cables in a mesh, and that all of these cables end up connecting the turbines to an electrical service platform, which is essentially an offshore substation. And from the offshore substation, there are either one or two export cables running into the landfall point, and the onshore export cables deliver the power to the onshore substation, which in turn is exported to the grid. Basically, an offshore wind developer's perspective to supply chain is creating the right supply packages, because there's no full EPC type of company that delivers everything all together. So a developer must select the right supply chain partners, and basically developers work with their suppliers to find partners and the right subcontractors. And localization becomes very important because all of these components are enormous, and logistics costs are also very high. Moving on with some overview of our projects, Vineyard Wind 1, its installed capacity will be 806 megawatts. We will be using GE's 13 megawatt Haliade X VTGs, and touch base on their parameters in a moment. And we will be having 62 units of these, which are located 1 nautical mile apart. We have a PPA of 20 years with 3 off-takers, Eversource, National, and Unitil. Basically, the highlights and benefits of this project are it is the first commercial scale offshore wind project in the US, located 15 miles off the coast of Martha's Vineyard and 35 miles off of mainland Massachusetts. It will generate clean energy for over 400,000 homes and businesses and reduce the carbon emissions by over 1.6 million tons per year. That means it will be removing 325,000 vehicles from the roadways. And while delivering clean energy, it will also create jobs. And the project will create 3,600 jobs for local residents. I would like to also list some of our achievements. Basically, the project received the record of decision from BOEM, and all permitting for federal and state have completed. We have executed the first project labor agreement in the industry, and this project will be built by union labor. Basically, this is also the first US offshore wind project to reach financial close. We've announced that on September 15th. The project secured $2.35 billion for the senior debt, and after that, all major contracts and procurements have been executed. The notice to proceed to major contractors are issued, which means the fabrication of the components have started. So as you can see over here on the left-hand side, the project is located on the northern part of our lease area, 541, and the export cable will be connected to a town called Barnstable in Cape Cod. In terms of the timeline, the project was awarded in 2018, and we have completed, as I mentioned, the permits, the financial close in 2021. Construction is starting. The first power will be delivered in 2023, and the full commercial operation will start in 2024. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the wind turbine generator to be used in this project. It will be manufactured by GE with 13 megawatt capacity each. The blades are massive. They are like 107 meter long, and from the bottom to the top of the tip, it's like 260 meters high. And one fun fact is one GE Haliade X spin could power the equivalent of a US household for a day. All right. So I would like to present the supply chain approach we've been taking. Basically, most offshore wind developers work with in a tiered approach, which has a cascading effect in supply chain. Developers typically sign contracts with tier 1 suppliers, and the main packages for those are like foundations, wind turbine generators, ESP is the offshore substation with the cables, and installation and vessel contractors, or horizontal directional drilling contractors. And then these tier 1 major contractors or suppliers go to their tier 2, and they subcontract some of the secondary steel, tower, electrical components, and these tier 2 subcontract basically some of the services such as like tools, fuels, support vessels, construction materials, and so on. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present Vineyard Wind here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, Sai, thank you so much. It's a really impressive achievement you have there with this project. And I looked at the achievements that you had listed. Certainly you were talking about some of the technology, but I got the sense that though building this out in the middle of the ocean is challenging, some of the business aspects may have been even more challenging. Could you talk about some of the things, whether it's permitting or financing, what were some of the biggest hurdles and how others might overcome these?
Sure, I'll be happy to. I mean, compared to Europe, offshore wind is new. I worked on multiple offshore wind projects in Europe, and in terms of development and permitting, the US is more challenging because this is new, and it's the same with onshore wind. When onshore wind started, when it was new, it was difficult to permit it. But once the first project, then the second, then the others started getting developed and become built, basically it became a less challenging process. So it took us years to come to this point to receive all permits and finalize the development. Having said that, the current administration is very supportive of renewable energy and offshore wind. So we feel that challenges are behind us. So for the whole offshore wind industry, we are proud and happy that we paved the way for other offshore wind projects, and many more will come online going forward, just like Adrienne was describing with the New York projects, and up and down the whole East Coast, we'll see a lot of offshore wind projects connecting to the shore and providing clean energy to the U.S. market.
Well, very good. Sai, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Up next, we have Shashank. Shashank Sane is the Executive Vice President and Head of Transmission with Invenergy. He works with customers to execute complex transmission projects while building relationships with stakeholders. In past roles, he's led Invenergy's M&A transactions and completed over $5 billion in financing and divestitures. Shashank, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Colin, and thanks to CGLA for hosting us today. Let me just put some content up here. All right. Well, thanks again to CGLA for hosting us today, and congratulations to Adrienne and NYSERDA on the award earlier. Hopefully, you'll be right back here next year to talk about another award for NYSERDA, the Clean Path project. But Clean Path New York is the project here to talk about today. Clean Path is a joint venture partnership between three entities within New York State. New York Power Authority, which is the largest public power municipal agency in the country. Invenergy, for where I am based in, which is the largest privately held clean energy developer in the country. We've developed over 27,000 megawatts of wind, solar, transmission, and other clean energy projects since our inception about 20 years ago, and with major presence in New York as well. We've been in New York for nearly 15 years, with our first project having been developed in 2008. The third partner on the project is Energy Re, which is a clean energy focused developer related to the related companies in New York with tremendous experience in and around the state there. So in terms of the project itself, it was really conceived to address the CLCPA in New York State, which is the Climate Leadership Act that was passed there a number of years ago, which had established a target of reaching 70% renewables by 2030 and ultimately getting to 100%. In addition to that, the project is really targeted to address the tale of two grids in New York. As people familiar with New York State may know, the upstate portion of New York State is highly renewable, over 70% carbon-free generation upstate, whereas the downstate grid, primarily New York City and the surrounding and the areas around New York City, are highly reliant on fossil generation. So, nearly only 20%, renewable power downstate. And really the reason for that is the lack of transmission between the upstate grid and the downstate grid. So the project that we put together with CleanPath is really intended to both address the goals of to 100% renewables, but also to address the issues with the flow of renewables within the state of New York. In terms of the project itself, it's really a unparalleled project, both in the scale and the scope of what is being envisioned here. The project has three main components, primarily the 3,800 megawatts of new wind and solar generation that will be developed upstate in New York, a 1,300 megawatt new HVDC transmission line between central New York and New York City, and then a pump storage facility to balance the flows across the transmission line to result in maximum utilization and maximum delivery of renewable energy into New York City. As I mentioned, the scale of what we're talking about here is really unparalleled. $3.5 billion in new transmission investment, $7.5 billion in new clean energy investment, all of which together will drive tremendous reduction in fossil fuel emissions throughout the state of New York. In addition to the emission benefits in the state, the project will create over 8,300 jobs in the first 3 years of construction and operations and lead to billions in avoided social costs over the 25-year contract. So diving a little bit deeper into the details of the project, the transmission line, as I mentioned, covers about 175 miles. It will connect in the central part of New York near the town of Delhi at a substation called Fraser, and traverse 175 miles down into New York City. For the majority of the route, about the first 105 miles, we'll be using existing right-of-way of a NYPA overhead transmission line, and will be buried underneath that. And for the remainder of the route, beginning around the Rock Tavern area, we'll be in public roads and in the rivers, the Hudson and Harlem rivers, to ultimately have our landing spot in Queens. The goal of our transition approach here was really to minimize the impacts on communities and the surrounding environment by using those existing corridors of the transmission line and the public roads and rivers. As we designed, where the transmission line should connect, the goal was to address the transmission constraints in New York. I mentioned earlier the tale of two grids. Really the tale of two grids being driven by not enough connectivity between the upstate grid and the downstate grid. So we selected our withdrawal point, highlighted there as Fraser. The goal was to have the lowest cost, but still most impactful interconnection point that we could. And so by selecting that point, we were able to optimize for both the distance of the route, but also for making the most impact in resolving those congestion points that we discussed. The second second element of the project to highlight is the use of the existing Blenheim-Gilboa pumped storage facility. This facility has been around for quite a long time. It was built in the early 1970s, but frankly has been relatively underutilized through, at least in the recent past. What the facility will allow us to do is balance the wind and solar generation as it's being produced in upstate New York, and during times when there's more wind and solar generation than there is transmission capacity, use that to charge the pump storage facility. And then when there are lower periods of wind and solar generation, discharge the renewable energy from the pump storage to utilize that transmission line as much as possible. So what the pump storage facility really allows us to do is optimize the mix of wind and solar resources and maximize the delivery of renewable energy into New York City, all while increasing the utilization of an existing asset and, again, minimizing the new impacts. In terms of the wind and solar portfolio itself, it is really one of the most diverse and strategically selected portfolios that we could find within New York State. Our goals in selecting this portfolio were really threefold. One is to maximize utilization of the line, which is to find the portfolio of resources that would be most complementary and result in the most utilization of the transmission line. We also want it to be geographically diverse within the state. both to balance out periods of variable wind and solar resources throughout the state, but also to bring as much benefit to as many parts of the state as we could. The development and construction of these facilities throughout the state will bring tremendous job and other economic development benefits to all parts of New York State. And then finally, have a technologically balanced portfolio as well. So you can see that the 3,800 megawatts of new renewable generation is roughly evenly split between wind and solar resources. The portfolio that was assembled here is also highly advanced in its development life cycle. So these are projects that in some cases are actually near construction now, or in other cases have a very high probability and high confidence that we'll get to the construction stage for these projects. So the construction of the project is important in terms of the transmission, the wind and solar facilities, and the pump storage facility. But really what we're most excited about is the benefit that the project will bring to New York State. That starts with the emission impact that I discussed earlier. Having all the renewable generation is great, and producing carbon-free electrons to put on the grid. But unless we can get those electrons to where they're needed and where they can be most impactful in displacing fossil generation, they have relatively limited impact. And so having the transmission in conjunction with the generation allows those electrons to flow into New York City and therefore have the maximum impact on fossil generation that we can. And what it results in is a 22% statewide reduction in emissions from fossil fuel generation. That's the equivalent of 39 million tons of avoided CO2 over the 25-year life of the contract with NYSERDA. In addition to the emission benefits of the project, it really has a tremendous economic development benefit for New York State. CleanPath is one of the, if not the biggest, renewable energy infrastructure project really ever awarded in the country. And that will all happen in New York State. So what that means is $11 billion of economic development all within New York State. That's coming from the 8,300 jobs that I discussed earlier, but also a number of other local economic development impacts from the direct spend and the indirect spend of the amount of construction and development work that will be undertaken with this project. In addition to the direct economic benefits of the project, these are really multi-generational assets that we'll be building for New York State. The wind and solar facilities have useful lives well in excess of the 25-year contract life with NYSERDA. And the transmission asset has a useful life of 70 years or even longer than 70 years, and will really be a key infrastructure asset for the state of New York for many generations. The transmission line will actually be owned by the New York Power Authority after the 25-year contract term, and therefore there to serve as a resource for all of New York State. In addition to the assets themselves, we look forward to working with our labor partners and utilizing PLAs for the parts of the project that are being enabled by the contract with NYSERDA. So really a tremendous economic development opportunity for New York State, and we're very excited to bring that value to the state. Beyond the overall economic development story, though, environmental justice is really at the core of what we were trying to do with this project. In line with the CLCPA Climate Leadership Act in New York State, 40% of the benefits of spending from this project will go to disadvantaged communities. Those benefits come from direct investments in those communities, from supply chain impacts, from community investment funds, and from the health and other social benefits that come from the reduced emissions and other benefits of the line. So we're really excited to work with those communities to bring as much value from the project as we can, and really engage in discussions with those communities. We'll be, ensuring that that employment opportunities are well advertised and available within the disadvantaged communities, and that MWBE organizations have the opportunity to participate in the project as well. One particular area of impact that we are excited about as well is an investment fund that we are establishing as part of this project. It'll be a $270 million investment fund focused on New York State and workforce development, community health, and education. be contributing to this fund over the life of the project and working with stakeholders across the community to determine what are the best uses of the fund. It may be directly in the communities associated with the project or really with statewide initiatives. But really, the goal is to engage with the community and decide what is the best way to deploy these dollars to have the greatest impact. So we're tremendously excited about the direct benefits coming from the project, from emissions reductions and from the deployment of clean energy within New York. But we really think that this project is a model for the way that these types of major infrastructure investments can bring benefits across the state, across the community, and frankly, across the country if we were to adopt these sorts of programs beyond New York. So again, thank you to CGLA for the time, and would love to answer any questions.
Well, thanks, Shashank. One question that came in here, you talked about the tale of two grids, and there are a lot of economic benefits and certainly societal benefits. Can you talk more about the resilience that this project will bring, in the face of climate change? How's this going to help in the reliability of power being delivered across the state?
Yeah, absolutely, Colin. So the transmission line will really bring a lot of resilience value to New York State. Being an underground line obviously has benefits in terms of being able to withstand significant weather events, but really at its core, better connectivity of the electric grid inherently brings more value from a resilience perspective. As resources are available and not available in different parts of the grid, having the transmission to interconnect those regions serves to create a balancing ability where if upstate has a surplus of energy and downstate is at a shortfall, having more transmission allows you to balance that, or vice versa. We've already talked about the offshore wind that is coming off the coast of New York City, and the ability to bring that power upstate really just brings better balance to the grid, and with balance comes greater reliability and resiliency. The one point that I'll note on the transmission line is that it'll actually be controlled by the New York ISO, the market operator within New York State. So they'll be using the line for whatever is the best purpose for the state of New York. So if the main goal that the New York ISO has is to ensure the reliability of the system. And so this will be just yet another very major tool in their toolbox to ensure that reliability. The other point that I'll mention on the generation side of things, I talked a little bit earlier about how diverse of a portfolio of generation that it is. As we think about a highly renewable future, that diversity of wind and solar resources is really important to ensuring that that the grids are able to withstand variability within each of those resources. So having the resources spread out throughout New York State, spread out across technology, again, is with the goal of diversification and balance on the grid to bring that reliability and resilience to the grid.
Well, great. We've got time for just a couple of questions for the group. I'd love to give everyone a chance to respond to a couple of these. One having to do with cybersecurity, another having to do with infrastructure spending and infrastructure bills. We as we've seen from a couple of these projects, like Shashank's and Steve's, putting transmission lines underground, a wonderful move for resilience. We're also seeing some of these projects with power purchase agreements that would go out decades. And there's not just climate change and uncertainty there, we're also seeing a lot of new cyber threats coming out. And a lot of these projects were getting designed and off the ground well before 2021 and with attacking the Colonial Pipeline and otherwise. Where do you see, cyber security falling in as a budget line item? And where do you see, is this covered by risk reduction? Is this part of, the ongoing expense of operations? How is this being built into these projects for tomorrow? We're seeing that increased risk. Shashank, you want to start?
Yeah, cybersecurity is obviously a very important element, really, as it pertains to every stage of the project, both how we design it in the development phase, and then the precautions that we take, the control centers that we develop, and the IT architecture that we deploy through the operations phase. So in our view, it's not something that, you just worry about when you are ultimately operating the line. It's a element of the project that needs to be considered at every phase to make sure that we have the right defenses and the right capabilities from that starting in day one, and in terms of how we interact with all of our parties. We have years and years of experience setting up our wind and solar and other power plants with NERC and highly established cybersecurity protocols in mind. And so, like I said, we really view it as it's not a individual function within any particular project. It really is at the core of the project and making sure it's considered at every stage in the life cycle.
Makes sense. Other thoughts from the group?
Chime in briefly, Colin. I mean, certainly it's a good question, and federal and state governments, as well as private industries, continue to be very focused upon this topic. So apt to point it out. But with regards to offshore wind, I think it's interesting because on the one hand, and not to be glib, but part of the challenge is accessibility, right? So these are fundamentally difficult projects to get to in terms of sort of the human risks and sort of terrorism, if you will, cybersecurity issues. So in a sense, there is sort of added physical protection in their relative remoteness and accessibility challenges. But fundamentally, I think the encryption protocols that exist, between operation centers and wind farms, have been very effective at limiting cyber terrorism and the ability to really to remotely access turbine controls. And so, as we look to offshore wind, or as we look to our onshore resources and the distributed resources that are bringing to bear, I mean, there's an inherent resiliency function just by the very nature of that distributed aspect of the works.
Makes sense. Well, I want to make sure we just have a couple minutes left here. Give everybody 30 seconds or so to talk about what's most encouraging that they're seeing, in the upcoming in the discussions around infrastructure spending, and what might make the biggest difference for the work that you're doing. Steve, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, certainly the transmission ITC will be tremendously helpful to all the projects you've heard about today, potentially. And there's a couple other provisions on the infrastructure bill side of things, whether it's the transmission facilitation program or there's a grid intertie program. All those DOE programs and the loan capabilities of the Loan Program Office, LPO at DOE, also offer important resources for projects like Sane and other projects you've heard about today. So we're thrilled with that things are moving forward in BC. Hopefully this will get over the finish line.
Sounds great. Sai, how about you?
Sure. I mean, the whole package is great, but what I'm most excited about is the transmission package. The reason for that is the goal for offshore wind by 2030 is 30 gigawatts noted by the president. So in order to reach that point, we need a lot of transmission infrastructure investments in the US, especially from the coast or like from the energy generation centers to the population centers. So what I'm really excited about is the grid investment.
Oh, great. Shashank?
Yep. Steve and Sai already highlighted a number of the transmission provisions in the bills that are in front of Congress right now. I think the other piece that I would highlight is what FERC is doing on transmission. It seems like everywhere we look, whether it's Congress, presidency, FERC, everyone's talking about transmission, which is a great thing. And so we're very excited about that. And the other point I would just note on the overall package that's in front of Congress is just the long-term nature of it, right? I mean, the best thing for our industry is just policy certainty for a long period of time, and it looks like we're finally getting that, which is great.
Well, excellent. And last word from the winner, Adrienne.
Thanks, Colin. I'd certainly echo all of the comments that we've just heard. I mean, the future is electric, really. It's about connectivity in the 21st century, and in the fact that we have strong leadership at the state level for clean energy programs and policies, and that is being echoed throughout the halls of Washington and on every single page of the proposed bill. It is really just so encouraging to see that there is an all-of-government approach in the Biden-Harris administration to achieving our collective clean energy future. So commend our leaders for their efforts. Wish them all well with the final throws and prospective, I think, votes even this evening. So it's an exciting time, and we hope that we all are poised to meet the challenge, because it is a big one and necessary.
Well, the wonderful thing about the projects highlighted here today is that the future is right here. I mean, it's happening now, and these projects are showing that it's possible. And these are big investments, but they're going to make a huge difference, as we've heard from each of these speakers. So I want to thank everybody and hope you have a great rest of the event.